The waves whispered secrets to the sand as twilight fell upon the sea. Above the restless tide stood the lighthouse, tall, weather-worn, and ancient, its stones etched with centuries of salt and silence. No one truly remembered when it had last seen a visitor. Inside, the only soul who lived there stood by the round window near the lantern room. She was not old, but neither was she young. Her name was Elaine. She had been on this island for how long now? Time, like the tide, seemed to wash over her memory in soft, lulling repetitions. Tonight, however, felt different. For the first time in what seemed like years, there were no stars. Elaine lit the beacon, as always, an old ritual nearly forgotten by the world. Her hands moved through the motions, flint wick oil breath. The light sputtered, then steadied a golden eye opening atop the tower. But the sky remained empty. Not a single star blinked in return, not even the moon. She stood by the window and watched, waiting for something she couldn't name. That was when she saw it. Far in the distance, beyond where the eye could usually reach, a soft glow, like a floating lantern, hovered just above the water. It pulsed gently, not threateningly. Not like a ship in distress. More like a memory drifting. Elaine blinked and it was gone. She stepped back from the window and touched the stone wall beside her. "Not again," she whispered. "Not tonight." Down in the kitchen, a kettle began to sing, though she couldn't remember putting it on. The next morning, the beach held footprints. Not hers, not from the gulls, but bare, small, careful footprints leading from the shoreline to the base of the lighthouse. And vanishing. Elaine didn't panic. She hadn't felt panic in years. Instead, she followed them half curious, half nostalgic. They stopped near the red-painted door she never used. The paint never peeled. The door never aged. A folded note lay on the stone beside it. "Do you remember the painting of the sky?" it read in soft, looping ink. Her heart paused. The phrase curled inside her like an echo from before the sea. She went back up to the lantern room. The air felt warmer there. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, music played a distant lullaby on a piano she no longer owned. The lighthouse had begun to remember. Elaine held the note in her hand, long after the footprints vanished with the morning tide. The question, "Do you remember the painting of the sky?" echoed like a forgotten tune she once hummed in her sleep. She didn't know how long she stood there by the red-painted door, the one the sea never touched, the one she had never opened. It had always been part of the lighthouse tucked into the northern wall near the rocks. But unlike every other door and passage, it never aged. The wood was smooth and dark, like lacquered cherry, the brass handle always warm. And she had never dared to touch it. Until now. Elaine pressed her hand to the knob. It clicked easily. No resistance. The door swung inward without a creak. Behind it was not a broom closet nor a storage room, but a staircase. Spiraling downward. She blinked. The lighthouse had no cellar. She was sure of that. But the stair was real cold stone beneath her feet, and a handrail made of coral and smooth white bone. Elaine descended. With every step, a sound grew louder. Not quite music, not quite wind. It was a harmony of things, half remembered. A lullaby, a bird's call, a page turning in a book that never finished. The stairway opened into a small chamber. Inside was a room lit by floating glass orbs that drifted through the air like jellyfish. The walls shimmered not with wallpaper or stone, but moving color blue, silver, gold like a sea made of sky. And at the center stood an easel. Upon it a painting. The sky? But not just any sky, her sky. Elaine walked closer. The brushstrokes were familiar. She knew them. Knew where her fingers had pressed the pigment, how her hand had trembled with the final star. It was the sky she once painted when she was 16, sitting on a rooftop painting the night she wished to last forever. That canvas had been lost long ago, lost when her life changed, when the sea took her brother, when silence claimed her art. But here it was, as if no time had passed, as if the lighthouse had saved it. She reached out and touched the dried paint. It was warm like skin. A heartbeat thumped beneath her fingertips. Behind her, the floating orbs dimmed, and a voice not hers, not human, spoke gently. "You came back." Elaine turned, but no one stood there. Only the swirling shimmer of the walls, the scent of wild lavender and sea salt. Then the easel shifted. It began to breathe. She stumbled back as the painting changed. The stars blinked out, replaced by dark thunderclouds. Wind churned the sea on the canvas and a lighthouse. Her lighthouse flickered in the distance. From the canvas came a whisper. "The storm is returning. Do you remember how to find the anchor?" Elaine didn't answer. She couldn't. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, behind doors she had long locked, she did remember. Later, back in her bedroom, she sat at the small wooden desk beside the round window. The note still rested in her lap. Outside, dusk gathered again, and the stars still refused to shine. She opened the drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside was a compass, old, rusted, but not broken, and beneath it a second note. "When the sky forgets the stars, you must remember for it." Elaine closed her eyes, and for the first time in many years, she whispered the name of the one she lost. "Calum?" The lighthouse creaked softly in reply, not as a building, but as a thing that heard her, a thing that remembered. The name echoed through the lighthouse like a pebble cast into a still lake. Calum. It wasn't just a name, it was a key. As Elaine whispered it, the wind outside stirred, not harsh, not cold, but gentle like a breath drawn after a long slumber. The fog that had clung to the cliffs all morning began to part, unveiling slivers of ocean glowing faintly in the dusk. The lighthouse groaned again, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to tilt slightly like the slow shifting of a ship in harbor. Elaine moved toward the lantern room, the highest point of the tower. She climbed each step slowly barefoot, carrying the rusted compass in her hand. The brass needle, long frozen in place, had begun to twitch with direction. When she reached the top, she found something new. A book. It was lying open on the floor beside the great lantern pages, fluttering in a breeze that came from no open window. Its cover was bound in seaweed thread and lined with gold leaf shaped like shells. She had never seen it before, yet it smelled of old paper and lavender, the scent of her childhood. On the page was a drawing. A boy with eyes full of stars, standing on the edge of a cliff, holding a lantern made of bone and moonlight. Calum. She traced the image with her fingers, and words appeared beneath it, drawn as if by invisible ink, reacting to her touch. The keeper of tides, the brother of stars. He left the island to silence the sea. He never returned. Elaine closed the book with trembling hands. She had not thought of him in years. But now, his voice began to return half-forgotten lullabies, sung to her beneath blanket forts. Wild stories of sea dragons and secret maps, promises carved into driftwood and hidden in tree hollows. And one memory clearer than the rest. The storm. The night the sea screamed and the lighthouse failed to light. The night he left. She returned to the painting room, the chamber beneath the lighthouse that shouldn't have existed. The sky in the painting had changed again. Now the clouds rolled like waves and lightning flickered within them. The lighthouse in the distance, a smaller one not hers, was shattered. She stepped closer. The frame of the painting cracked open like a door, and through it she saw another place. A shoreline cloaked in silver fog where ships floated with sails of pearl. A sky of violet clouds drifted above, and a path of broken stars stretched across the sand like a trail. At the end stood a figure, a boy taller now, wrapped in a cloak of twilight. Calum. Elaine reached toward him, but her fingers passed through the canvas. Not paint, not air. It was memory, and it was not yet time. The painting shut itself. The orbs in the room dimmed once more, and the walls of the chamber flickered for a moment, revealing something underneath Gearsmere's ancient stone, etched with symbols not of this world. The lighthouse was older than she thought. Not just a building, not just a watchtower. It was a vessel, and now it was awakening. Back upstairs, Elaine stood in the lantern room again. She lit the flame early that evening, not because of the fog, not because it was her duty, but because she felt someone was watching. Someone needed the light. The beam spun slowly, sweeping across the ocean like a searcher's eye. Far in the distance, the glowing shape she saw the night before returned. Closer this time. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't a lantern. It was a door floating upright on the surface of the sea. And hanging from the knob was a ribbon. Her ribbon. From the day Calum vanished. The name echoed through the lighthouse like a pebble cast into a still lake. Calum. Elaine hadn't spoken it in years, not since the night of the storm. The moment the word left her lips, something shifted. The wind outside no longer blew randomly. It circled the lighthouse with intention, as if wrapping it in a whisper. She stepped back from the window. The air in the room thickened, not heavy, but aware, as if the lighthouse was listening. Downstairs, the compass on her desk trembled and spun. The rust that had seized its needle for decades flaked away like dried petals. It pointed not north, but out to sea, a direction she had no name for. Elaine didn't question it. She walked the spiral stair once more, each step downward creaking like bones long settled in silence. But before she reached the bottom, the air shifted again. A voice, soft, boyish, called from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Do you still keep the stars?" Elaine? She froze. It wasn't the voice of memory. It was recent, present. She whispered back, her voice trembling, "I never stopped." In the kitchen, her old kettle sang again, though it hadn't held water in years. She poured nothing into a cracked teacup and sat beside the fireplace where driftwood burned in blue and violet hues. On the mantel sat a photograph she didn't recall placing there. In it, 2 children stood barefoot in the sand, one with wild hair and mischief in his smile, the other holding a small hand-painted lantern. Her lantern! His smile! She blinked and the photo was gone. That night, she returned to the lantern room. The stars had not yet returned to the sky, but something else glimmered above thin strands of silver, stretching from the clouds like threads from a spider's loom. They trembled with music too faint to hear. She lit the beacon. The beam cut through fog like a blade of warm light sweeping across the water in slow, deliberate arcs. Far in the distance, the floating glow appeared again, but now it was clearer. It was not a ship. It was not a light. It was a door. A wooden door standing upright on the water, perfectly still despite the waves. From its handle fluttered something thin and white. Elaine stepped back from the window and retrieved the compass. Its needle spun once, then locked on the door. She looked again. The ribbon on the handle had writing on it, her own handwriting, the same she had used when she carved a message into driftwood all those years ago, the day after Calum vanished. "Come back when the sky forgets." Suddenly, a knock echoed through the tower. It wasn't loud nor hurried, just a polite, patient tap, 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 as if someone stood at the lighthouse door holding an umbrella and waiting for tea. Elaine descended. The red-painted door, the one she had opened for the first time only yesterday, stood closed again. The brass handle was warm. A breeze smelled of brine and old books. She opened it. No one stood there, only fog. And just beyond the fog, standing barefoot on a puddle of moonlight, was a boy, no older than 10, wearing a coat too large for him, sleeves rolled to his elbows. In his hands, he held a paper boat. "I forgot where I came from," he said gently, voice filled with distant thunder. "But I remember where I'm going." Elaine couldn't breathe. She tried to speak his name again, but it stuck to her tongue like salt. He offered her the boat. On its side, scribbled in ink that shimmered like fish scales, was a message. "Find the anchor, or the tide will take us both." And with that, he stepped backward and vanished into mist. Dawn came slowly, dressed in mist. Elaine stood at the edge of the island where smooth stones met sea foam. The air smelled faintly of lavender and salt, the kind of scent that lingered from dreams. In her hand, she still clutched the paper boat. It was no longer damp. The message on its side remained. To leave the island, follow what never moved. She whispered it aloud, and the wind seemed to listen. The sea for once was not wild. It rested, a silver sheet brushed by slow, steady breath. And out there, unchanged, stood the door. A tall wooden frame, weathered and pale, floated without sinking. It defied waves. It defied logic. It had no anchor. Yet it did not drift. Elaine stepped back. The compass in her pocket vibrated not with force, but with longing. Its needle pointed true, aimed directly at the impossible door on the horizon. She knew then the lighthouse wasn't asking her to keep the light. It was asking her to follow it. She packed a small satchel. Just a few things. The compass, the ring with Calum's name, a jar of dried petals, a single match. She left the beacon unlit for the first time in years. And the tower did not protest. Instead, as she walked down the slope toward the cove, the lighthouse gave a long, low hum, like a sigh. The kind of sound a sleeping giant might make before dreaming again. At the shore, an old rowboat awaited. She hadn't placed it there, but it was hers. She climbed in, and the sea, ever obedient to quiet resolve, carried her outward. Oarless, rudderless, yet steady, the boat moved as if guided by a current only the island could feel. The door grew closer. It was taller than it had seemed from afar, nearly twice her height. There were carvings along its sides, spirals, stars, fish, feathers, eyes, some glowing faintly as if inked in moonlight. Elaine reached for the knob. It was cold, and for a moment her hand trembled. She thought of her brother, of the night the storm took him, of the silence after. Then she turned the handle. The door did not open. It swallowed. Not like a trap, not like a fall. Like entering water without getting wet. Like breathing memory. One step and she was no longer on the sea. She stood instead on a path made of starlight floating in a sky with no horizon. Beneath her, the sea still churned, but upside down, as if she were walking above a reflection too stubborn to fade. The path led forward, curving gently, and in the distance she saw a lighthouse, but not hers. This one was taller, with black stone and golden windows. Light pulsed from its peak like a heartbeat. Around its base stood dozens of doors, some floating, some open, some locked tight. Elaine walked. The stars here were not stars. They were memories, bright and flickering. As she passed each one, she saw fragments. A boy tying a ribbon to a driftwood anchor. A girl laughing beside a bonfire made of glowing feathers. A storm tearing through a wooden bridge while voices screamed from a tower. She wanted to look away, but the path would not let her. She arrived at the foot of the new lighthouse. A voice echoed down its height, familiar, steady, and older than before. "You found the door." Elaine looked up. At the top of the tower, silhouetted in silver, stood Calum. He held a lantern made of bone and wind, and his eyes no longer shimmered with youth. They shimmered with knowing. "The storm's not done," he said. "You have the anchor, don't you?" Elaine touched her satchel. She did not know what the anchor was, but she had carried it all along. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. There he was. Calum standing atop the obsidian lighthouse, holding a lantern that shimmered like moonlight caught in a bottle. It cast no shadow, only movement strands of silver wind twisting in impossible spirals inside its glass. His voice carried without effort, as if it was part of the world itself. "You brought it, didn't you?" The anchor. Elaine didn't answer. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the wooden ring. Her fingers curled around it like a lifeline. The carving inside Calum was faint, worn smooth by time, but it was there. Was this the anchor? Or was the anchor something else? "I don't know what it is," she called out. Calum didn't move. He stood still as a statue carved from memory. "It's what held you in place when I was gone," he said. "It's what brought you through the door." Elaine looked down at the starlit path beneath her feet. It shimmered with every thought she dared not speak. The anchor wasn't an object. It was a truth. A tether. The lighthouse door creaked open behind her. Without a word, she stepped inside. The interior was unlike her own. It had no stairs, no walls. Only space wide endless and filled with floating islands of memory. Each drifted like a dream just out of reach. As she passed through the air, these islands shimmered and turned toward her. Some glowed warmly, others flickered like dying stars. One held a memory of her and Calum as children dancing barefoot in the rain. Another showed her alone at the kitchen table writing letters she never sent. Each moment hung in suspension, weightless, timeless, unreachable, until one called to her. It was not bright, not loud, just steady. A small island of memory that held an image she had long buried. A storm, a shattered lighthouse window, a boy standing on the rocks holding the lantern of wind and whispering a name. Her name. Elaine floated toward it. The memory enveloped her. She was there again. The night the storm came, winds howled through the shutters. Rain lashed the glass like claws. The sea rose higher than it ever had, angry, wild, and full of voices. And Calum had stood at the edge of the cliff, lantern in hand, whispering spells made of stars. "I have to go," he had said. "The sea is asking. It won't stop unless someone answers." "You can't," she had cried. "You'll be lost." "I'm already lost if I stay," he whispered. Then he gave her the wooden ring. "If I don't come back, follow the still thing, the thing that never moved." She had sobbed, clutching the ring as he walked into the wind. Elaine opened her eyes. She was back inside the black lighthouse, surrounded by floating memory. Only now the islands were still. Calum stood beside her, no longer at the top, no longer far away, just beside her. He looked the same and yet older. as if years had passed within him that time could not measure. "I shouldn't have gone alone," he said. Elaine looked at the ring in her palm. "You didn't." He smiled, just barely, and then held out the lantern. "Do you want to remember the rest?" She hesitated. What else was there? Calum pressed the lantern into her hands. It was warm, lighter than air. Inside, wind circled like a breath that had never exhaled. When her fingers closed around it, everything changed. She saw the truth. The lighthouse was not just a place. It was a keeper of paths, a place between forgetting and remembering, between leaving and returning. And she was not merely a keeper of the light. She was the light. The anchor wasn't an object, nor a memory, nor even Calum. The anchor was the story, their story. And now it was time to finish it. The lantern pulsed softly in Elaine's hands, as if breathing in out and out, not with fire, but with memory. Calum stood before her, but he no longer cast a shadow. His presence was real, and yet not bound to form. Around them, the floating islands of memory began to swirl gently, as if drawn into the lantern's light. Elaine looked up at her brother. "What happens now?" He smiled, and in that smile was sorrow and relief stitched together. "Now we let the sea remember." The black lighthouse shuddered from within. Not violently, but deeply, like a great bell struck far beneath the waves. The sound passed through Elaine's bones like music too ancient to name. Calum turned and walked toward the center of the room. There, where the floor faded into mist, a staircase began to emerge made of glimmering coral and starbone. It descended not downward, but inward. "Where does it go?" Elaine asked. Calum didn't answer, but he began to walk, and she followed. The steps were endless, but Elaine did not tire. With each one, more memories returned, not just her own, but his as well, their childhood before the storm, their shared stories, the game they used to play pretending the lighthouse was a ship, and they were explorers mapping constellations in the floorboards. She had forgotten the sound of his laugh. Now it came back echoing softly in the depths of her mind, like birdsong returning to a long silent forest. The staircase ended in a chamber made entirely of moving water. Not wet, not cold, just liquid light suspended in air. At the center, a great basin floated. Within it, the sea, but not the sea she knew. The sea of what had been forgotten. Calum stood beside the basin and looked into its shimmering surface. Elaine stepped closer and saw her own face flickering. Behind it, moments too many to count rose and fell like tides. Joy, loss, fear, wonder, all turning. "The sea took you," she whispered. "I thought it had devoured you." "It did," Calum replied, "but it also kept me." He dipped his hand into the basin. The water did not ripple, it sang. And suddenly the basin expanded its light, pouring outward to reveal a vision beyond comprehension. A storm of voices lost at sea. A library beneath the ocean floor. A child building a ship out of tears. A girl lighting a beacon made from the first star ever born. Elaine clutched the lantern tighter. The anchor, the lantern, the compass. They were never separate. They were aspects of one story. Hers. "You're not just remembering me," Calum said quietly. "You're remembering you." Elaine stared into the basin and saw a woman sitting alone in the lantern room, year after year, waiting for stars to return. "I stopped living," she murmured. "No," Calum said gently. "You were holding the light. You became the one thing that never drifted." And suddenly she understood. She hadn't been stranded on the island. She was the island, a lighthouse made of memory and waiting, a keeper of the path, a watcher of storms. "Then why bring me here?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because the sea has finished forgetting," Calum said. "And it's ready to return what it kept." From his coat, he removed a small stone wrapped in silver string. He placed it in the basin. It sank and the sea began to glow. Around them, the chamber brightened, as if the moon had risen from beneath the waves. A wind circled the basin, lifting strands of water like ribbons, weaving them into patterns that sang like lullabies. Elaine felt her skin prickle. The water called to her, not to drown, to belong. Calum looked at her one last time. "You can stay," he said, "or you can return." She asked the only question that mattered. "Will I forget again?" He shook his head. "No, this time the lighthouse will remember too." Elaine stepped into the basin. The water didn't resist. It welcomed her. The lantern in her hand flared with brilliant light and then softened into a single strand of wind that wrapped gently around her wrist. The sea remembered, and so did she. The sea that remembered did not crash or roar. It hummed, softly like wind in the bones of an old shell. It held Elaine now, not her body, but her memory, her breath, her thread of story woven into the fabric of tides. She did not sink, she floated. Within the glowing basin, time unfurled like a scroll. There were no currents, only moments, only reminders. And the lighthouse was watching. At first, she saw nothing but blue. Not the cold blue of a stormy sea, but a luminous living hue like starlight filtered through water. Shapes moved within it, slow and vast. Whales carved from stories, constellations, swimming with gentle grace ships, with sails made from sleep. And in the center of it all, the island. Not how she remembered it. This was no mere slab of land with cliffs and a tower. It was alive. Roots of coral spread beneath it like veins. Its cliffs pulsed with light from within, and its soil glowed faintly like moon-dusted parchment. The lighthouse stood at its heart, a beacon not of warning, but of invitation. And above it, a sky with no stars slowly began to change. Elaine stood though there was no ground and turned slowly, arms outstretched. The lantern that had wrapped around her wrist was now a bracelet of wind, moving with her pulse. She was not lost. She was returning. Behind her, Calum appeared once more. Not a ghost, not a memory, but something brighter. "You remember now," he said. "That's enough." "Is it?" Elaine asked. "The sky's still empty." He smiled not sadly, but with knowing. "That's because it's waiting for you." They rose together out of the basin, the chamber the memory sea. They ascended not through stairs, but through song, a current of sound that carried them upward into the heart of the lighthouse. As they emerged, Elaine gasped. The black tower was gone. In its place stood the lighthouse as it had once been, white stone, weathered by kindness, crowned with golden glass. But now it floated, above the ocean, above the sky, held aloft by memory and moonlight. Below them, hundreds, no thousands of doors drifted. Some were open, some closed, some glowing like lanterns themselves. Each one pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Elaine stepped to the edge of the tower and saw something she had not seen in years, a star, then another, and another. One by one, the sky began to light itself. Not in patterns she recognized, but in new constellations. A girl with a lantern, a boy with wind for eyes, a lighthouse built from time. Each star sang a note. Each note recalled a story, and together they formed a sky worth remembering. "Will I go back?" Elaine asked. "You already have," Calum said. She looked down and saw the island below, now glowing from within. It was no longer alone. Other lighthouses dotted the sea, some crumbled, some shining, some waiting to be found. Calum pointed to one. "You'll wake up there, but not the same, and not alone." Elaine held her lantern bracelet tight. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was the lighthouse turning slowly in the sky, its golden light sweeping across a world no longer forgotten. She awoke to birdsong. The scent of salt filled her nose, and she was back on the island. Her island. Only this time it was different. The cliffs no longer crumbled. The sea was gentle, and in the air hung a presence soft, watching, welcoming. She sat up in bed, and the morning light poured through the windows like honey. On her desk lay the compass. It pointed inward. Next to it, a folded paper boat, and a ribbon tied neatly around it bearing 5 handwritten words. Elaine stood on the cliffs of the island, barefoot in the morning dew, watching the sea glisten like polished glass. The lighthouse no longer hummed with sorrow. It stood tall behind her, breathing quietly, as if resting after a long, hard vigil. Above the sky was not filled with stars. It was filled with soft traces of them, as if the stars were painting themselves back into place. Not all at once, one gentle light at a time. She held the paper boat in her hands. The ribbon tied around it fluttered in the breeze. "The sky remembers you too." Elaine read the words again, slower this time, as if they might change. They didn't, but something inside her did. She returned to the lantern room, where the windows now let in gold instead of gray. The view was endless yet familiar. A beam of sun caught the lens of the great light, and for the first time in years, it gleamed even without flame. Sitting at the center of the room was a box. It hadn't been there the night before. The box was carved of driftwood, tied shut with twine the color of storm clouds. She untied it slowly, the fibers fraying in her fingers like old promises. Inside was a single item, a map, but it was not drawn on paper. It was etched into glass, and the light of the morning revealed its trails only when held at just the right angle. It showed no land, no sea, only lanterns. Floating points of soft flames scattered like fireflies across a darkened canvas. Some pulsed gently, some flickered. Others had gone out completely. In the center, her island, and from it a glowing trail stretching forward from one lantern to another. A path. Elaine touched the first light on the trail. It pulsed beneath her fingertip, and a whisper rose from the air around her. Where light remembers, the path remains. She breathed in deeply. The lighthouse had never been her prison. It had been her beginning. That evening, she packed a new satchel. Not out of escape, but preparation. The compass now spun freely, unbound by direction, as if all paths were open. She placed the ring, the feather, the map, and the paper boat inside. Then she descended the tower one final time, not slowly, not with hesitation, but with steady purpose. The island awaited her. It knew what she was about to do. At the edge of the cove, a new boat waited. Not the old wooden rowboat of memory. This one was strange, its hull made of glass, its sail stitched from parchment, its lantern already lit and hanging at the bow. It hummed gently, not from engine, but from recognition. It was a vessel not meant to cross water. It was meant to follow stories. Elaine stepped aboard. The sea parted like pages turning. As the boat moved forward, the sky above her changed. The stars began to shift. They moved slowly at first, rearranging themselves into new constellations. Not ones charted by sailors or astronomers, but ones pulled from dreams. A girl holding a lighthouse in her palm. A boy made of wind and sky. An island rising on the back of a whale. A door on the sea. The boat followed the trail of lanterns marked on the map. Each one they passed flickered and brightened. And behind her, the beam of her lighthouse continued to spin, not in warning, but in farewell. Hours passed, or days. Time had softened. Then she saw it, the first of the lost lanterns. It floated low above the sea, dim, barely alive. Elaine reached into her satchel and removed the match. She struck it once. A gentle flame. No smoke, no sound. She leaned forward and touched the match to the dying lantern. It came to life. Its glow brightened, steadying, and rose higher into the air. Behind it, a faint voice. Not Caleb's, not hers, but someone forgotten, whispered. I remember now. Elaine smiled. She looked at the map again. Dozens of lanterns awaited. Some dim, some lost, some yet to be found. And she, the one who remembered the stars, the anchor, the light, she would reach them. One by one, the boat moved without sound. Beneath it, the sea shimmered like fabric woven from the reflections of stars that had not yet reappeared. Elaine sat quietly at the bow, her fingers tracing the edges of the glowing map, the lantern bracelet still wrapped gently around her wrist, humming with soft pulses. She had relit 4 lanterns. Each one had returned a memory, not hers, but someone else's. A mother calling her child in a forgotten language. A fisherman who once sang to the waves. A girl painting on the inside of a seashell, waiting for someone who never came home. The sea remembered for them. Elaine simply helped it speak. The 5th lantern appeared just before dawn. It drifted low, almost touching the surface of the water, a faint blue ember flickering within. Unlike the others, it didn't respond to her presence. It didn't rise or pulse. It only shivered as if afraid. She leaned closer, whispering softly, I see you. The ember flared briefly, then dimmed again. Elaine took the match from her satchel. It was the last one. She hesitated. Only use what needs you, Caleb had once said, not what simply wants to be seen, once. But this lantern, it didn't want anything. It was hiding. She struck the match. The tiny flame danced between her fingers. She leaned forward, holding it toward the blue ember. Nothing. The flame didn't catch. The ember didn't respond. The match burned out. Elaine frowned. The other lanterns had all welcomed the light. This one refused it. She reached for the lantern itself, expecting it to vanish like the others. But her fingers touched it. Cold, heavy, real. She gasped. The moment she touched it, the sea around her changed. No longer gentle, no longer silent. It surged upward like a breath held too long, not violent but overwhelming. The boat did not rock, but the stars above blinked out one by one. The map glowed white-hot, then darkened, and the sky turned inward. Elaine shut her eyes. When she opened them again, she was somewhere else. She stood in a room, dark, small, windowless. The floor was stone damp, scattered with old books and wilted flowers. At the center, a child, curled beneath a blanket, clutching something in their hands, not a toy, not a treasure, but a piece of broken glass. The child was humming, a song without melody, a loop of sound made from fear and forgetting. Elaine stepped closer. The child looked up, eyes wide, empty, familiar. It was her. A version of her she had buried long before Calum, before the lighthouse, before the storm. The girl who had stopped believing in the world. Elaine knelt beside her younger self. She didn't speak. She didn't try to explain. She just opened her palm and placed the lantern bracelet gently beside the child's hand. The girl looked at it, then at her, and finally whispered, "Will it ever stop hurting?" Elaine's voice shook. "No, but it will stop being alone." The child reached out, touched the bracelet, and the room filled with light, not blinding, warming. Elaine stood again in her boat. The lantern before her no longer shimmered blue. It blazed golden white, hovering high above the mast, pulsing like a star reborn. Her bracelet had returned to her wrist, but now it glowed. The sea calmed, and somewhere beneath it something smiled. She didn't strike a new match. She didn't need to. The lantern had lit itself not from flame, but from memory accepted, from a child no longer forgotten, from a version of herself she had finally embraced. The map shimmered once more. The path forward revealed 3 new lights, each one dim, each one waiting. Elaine breathed in the salt air, and the sky whispered back, "Thank you." Elaine didn't sail so much as glide. The water around her seemed to part, not out of duty to the wind, but out of recognition. The boat responded to her breathing, slow, steady, like an old friend sinking footsteps beside her on a familiar path. She had lit 9 lanterns. Each one brought back someone. But more than that, each one brought back part of the sea. Not the physical ocean, but the living memory beneath it. The kind of sea that carried voices and dreams and losses too deep to name. The 10th light on her map pulsed slowly far away, almost timid. She turned toward it. The boat obeyed. As dusk fell, the sky turned a deeper shade of violet. Stars blinked in and out, not randomly, but deliberately, as if someone were writing messages across the heavens in a language of light. Elaine began to hum, a lullaby. She didn't remember learning it, but the tune arrived in her mouth like something passed down through the blood. The boat slowed. The sea went still. And then she heard it. A voice. Elaine. It wasn't Calum. It wasn't herself. It wasn't memory. It was beneath the boat, deeper than the current, older than the lighthouse. Elaine leaned over the edge, her hair grazing the water. There was no reflection, only shadow. The voice again, like the echo of her name through stone. "Do you know why we sang to the sea?" She closed her eyes, and the sea opened. She found herself standing at the base of the lighthouse, not hers, but one older with vines crawling up its sides and bells hanging from every window. It was raining feathers, and the waves had turned to glass. In front of her stood a woman, not young, not old, dressed in robes made of tide and time. Her eyes were endless. Elaine did not speak. The woman did. "Long before you were born, long before the first island remembered its name, there were keepers of forgetting." Elaine blinked. "You mean lighthouses?" The woman shook her head gently. "No, the ones before the lighthouses. The ones who sank things, buried them deep. Not to harm, but to protect." She stepped forward. "The sea is not cruel, it is full." The glass sea rippled. Images flickered beneath it like film. A man giving away his grief to a stone. A city sinking under the weight of its unspoken truths. A child whispering into a shell and hiding it beneath her pillow for the night to keep safe. "These," the woman said, "are what you've been lighting." "Memories," Elaine whispered. The woman nodded. "Stories that were trusted to be forgotten, not because they were weak, but because they were heavy." Elaine thought of the child version of herself holding pain in silence. She understood. They weren't ready to be remembered until now. The woman's hand lifted. In her palm was a lantern, dark, unlit, and shaped differently than the others. Not round, not floating, but sharp, angular, like a shard of memory broken and refitted into a cage. This one, the woman said, was not forgotten. Elaine stepped closer. It was buried. The moment her fingers brushed the lantern, wind surged upward from beneath the sea. The sky flared, and suddenly she was back in her boat, gasping, lantern in hand, trembling. Her wrist burned. The bracelet pulsed wildly, like it couldn't decide if it was afraid or awake. The sea beneath her rolled with sound voices rising from its depths, layered ancient rising like bubbles from a cave long sealed. And in the center of those voices, one she hadn't heard in decades. Her mother, singing. Elaine wept, not in sadness, but in relief. She had not expected this part of herself to return. Not now, not ever. And yet here it was not demanding, not haunting, but offering. She cradled the lantern in both hands and whispered, "I'm ready." It lit, not with gold, not with blue, but with soft green, the color of moss of memory, before words of comfort unspoken. And the sea once again fell silent. The sky overhead blinked, the stars shifted, and a new constellation formed not above her but within her. It didn't need to be named. She was the name. Night had returned, but it no longer felt empty. Elaine stood in her boat, holding the green-lit lantern close to her chest. It no longer burned. It glowed. A soft, pulsing warmth, like hands cupped around a breath. The water around her reflected the light back at her, turning the sea into a canvas of green ripples, quiet and alive. She reached for the map. The edged glass no longer needed sunlight to reveal its path. It shimmered on its own, now lines of light tracing routes she hadn't yet taken. The path of lanterns stretched onward, but something had changed. The lights ahead were mirrored, double. Each flame now had a twin one above one below. She glanced at the stars and gasped. They were not stars. They were reflections. The sky had become a mirror of the sea, and the sea had become a mirror of the sky. As she looked closer, she noticed something else. She was not alone. In the mirrored sky above her, other boats drifted quiet like hers. Each held someone. Some looked familiar. Some looked distant. One held a woman wrapped in a cloak of moths. Another, a child made entirely of folded paper. All sailed their own mirrored sea, tracing their own lantern paths. Elaine waved toward one. The reflection waved back, not simultaneously, but just before she did, as if it knew. As if it wasn't a reflection at all. She sat down in her boat and stared upward. What was above was not just sky, it was another world. One where things she thought she had forgotten were still sailing. Was this what the sea protected? Not just memory, but versions of herself left behind. She saw one now, a reflection of her at age 17, standing in a white dress on a ship with red sails, laughing into the wind. Another older silent holding a lantern made of ink and silence. So many selves, so many journeys, all part of her, all continuing even when she had stopped. Suddenly, the sea beneath her grew still, not calm still, like breath held, like a page before the story turns. The green lantern pulsed once, then dimmed. From the horizon, a figure began to walk toward her. Not sailing, walking. Each step formed a ripple that echoed through both sea and sky. Elaine stood unsure if she was afraid. The figure came closer, wrapped in robes of blue glass and starlight. Tall, featureless, but not frightening. It held no weapon, no light, only a mirror, oval-shaped with a frame carved from driftwood and bone. The figure held it out to her without speaking. Elaine hesitated. She looked into it and saw, not her reflection, but herself at her most uncertain. A moment she had buried so deeply it no longer had shape. A time when she wanted to let the lighthouse light go out forever. A time when she almost walked into the sea. And yet, she hadn't. She had stayed. She had endured. The mirror pulsed. And in the reflection, her other selves, those drifting lights above, leaned closer. Not to judge her. To thank her. For not letting go. Elaine reached into the mirror, and for the briefest moment, felt the weight of every choice she'd ever made. And for the first time in her life, she didn't wish to change a single one. The mirror shattered into light, not broken, but released. The shards rose into the air and became new stars in the mirrored sky. The figure bowed and vanished into mist. Elaine sat again, her breath slow, her hands steady. The green lantern was gone, not stolen, not lost. Integrated. Its warmth now beat within her chest. And the mirrored world smiled. She could feel it. She lifted her eyes one last time. The stars above no longer danced alone. They formed a circle, around it a single name. Not her own. Not Calum's, just a word, remember. And beneath it, begin again. Elaine smiled. The boat moved, and ahead 3 more lanterns waited, gentle, dim, willing. The story was not ending. It was returning. The sea grew colder as she sailed onward. Not dangerous, not cruel, just quiet, like breath held before a name is spoken. Elaine wrapped her shawl tighter, though she knew no real wind touched her. The boat moved slowly now, not from resistance, but reverence, as if approaching something sacred, something old. Ahead, the horizon was swallowed by a thick bank of silver fog, and in the center of it pulsed the 12th lantern, dim, almost still. As her boat entered the mist, the world narrowed. No stars, no sky, no sound but the hush of the sea. The boat's lantern dimmed, and her breath made no echo. She might have been floating through the inside of a pearl, luminous, timeless. Then, without warning, she heard it. A bell. Low, distant, ringing once every few heartbeats. Not the sharp clang of metal, but the slow, resonant toll of something far larger. She leaned forward. Shapes began to form. Stone, glass, spirals. A lighthouse half hidden in fog. But this one was wrong. Its windows were boarded, its beacon broken. Vines crept across its face like veins on a sleeping giant. No light, no warmth, only stillness. Elaine stepped off the boat. She didn't remember the boat stopping. The mist was ankle-deep around her feet, curling like silk. She approached the lighthouse slowly, her hand brushing the stone-cold brittle. Each step echoed through her bones like a memory of footsteps she never took. The bell tolled again. And from within the lighthouse, a voice so faint she wasn't sure it was sound. Do not light what was meant to rest. She paused, but only for a moment. Then she pushed the door open. Inside the lighthouse was hollow. No stairs, no lantern room, no furniture. Just a spiral of fog climbing upward like smoke, and a single object at its base. A mirror round framed in sea glass, standing upright in a cradle of bone. Elaine approached. Her own reflection didn't greet her. Instead, she saw a door, the same door that had first appeared on the sea. Only this time it was shut, and in front of it knelt a figure cloaked in rags, back turned, head bowed. Elaine gasped. It was her. Not a memory, not a version, her. Still, silent, waiting. She touched the mirror's surface. The scene rippled, and she was there, standing on a shoreline made of fog and glass where the sea didn't move and the sky didn't breathe. Her other self still knelt before the closed door, hands resting on her lap, empty. Elaine knelt beside her. Why are you here? She whispered. The kneeling woman did not move, but her voice came like rain against glass. Because I couldn't open it alone. Elaine reached for the door's handle. It was heavy, rusted cold. Together they pulled. It opened with the sound of a storm drawing its first breath. On the other side, the world she had left behind. The lighthouse on her island. The kitchen with the kettle. The stack of letters she never mailed. The warmth of being known. And beside it all, the boy with the wind lantern. Watching. Waiting. She turned to her other self. Will you come with me? The woman smiled and faded into light. The fog around the shoreline lifted, and she was back inside the ruined lighthouse, only now it was glowing. The vines withered away. The stone warmed. The spiral reformed, climbing high above her. At the top, a beacon. Flickering, unlit. Waiting. Elaine ascended, no longer afraid. At the summit, she found the 12th lantern. Faint. Wavering. But not gone. She placed her hand above it. The flame rose slowly, not from fire, but from forgiveness. It wasn't a light for the world. It was a light for herself. The lantern burned silver. The bell tolled one last time. And outside, the fog began to part, not retreating, but transforming into stars. Stars that hadn't been there before. Stars born from silence. Elaine returned to her boat. She looked back once. The lighthouse now stood tall in the clearing sky, its light spinning gently across the sea. One more beacon rekindled. One more story brought home. The sea opened wide beneath a sky of rekindled stars. Elaine's boat drifted quietly, a single thread of motion against an ocean woven from reflections. The silver light from the 12th lantern still shimmered faintly in her chest, not heavy but deep. It beat like a second heart, guiding her not by sight but by knowing. Only 2 lanterns remained. The 13th one flickered ahead, suspended in the air, just above a cluster of broken waves. A place the sea seemed unwilling to smooth, where currents folded back on themselves like thoughts long avoided. Elaine recognized the feeling. It was a memory trying not to be remembered. As the boat approached, wind picked up, not violent, not sharp, but layered. It came in voices speaking in circles, whispering phrases she couldn't quite hold on to. Snippets of moments she didn't know she'd lost. "Don't forget your coat. The sky's too big tonight. Promise me you'll come back." Each voice was familiar and faceless. Each one tugged at her ribs like invisible strings. The lantern pulsed. Elaine reached out, and the wind swallowed her. Not physically, but completely. She blinked, and the world vanished. No boat, no stars, only wind endless echoing, carrying her through places she'd lived but never visited. Memories that had been too quiet to surface before. She stood suddenly in a hallway, dimly lit walls lined with coats and calendars. A door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. She knew where she was. Her childhood home. The memory unfolded around her. A young Elaine, 10 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor. Crayons scattered. A drawing of a lighthouse taped to the refrigerator. Childish, colorful, filled with too many stars. She was crying. Outside, thunder rolled. And beside her, not her mother, not Calum, but someone else. A woman with a long braid and hands that smelled of sugar and seawater. Elaine had long believed this figure was imaginary, a story she'd made up to comfort herself on stormy nights. But here she was, real, kneeling beside the child Elaine and whispering, "The wind forgets nothing. It only waits for you to be ready." Elaine stepped closer. "I remember you now," she said aloud, though no one looked at her. The woman smiled without turning. "Then it's time." She reached into the pocket of her apron and held out a seashell, small, spiral-shaped golden with flecks of blue. The child Elaine took it, and the wind stilled. Suddenly, Elaine stood on the deck of her boat once more. The lantern before her now burned with a soft amber light, and in her hand impossibly was the same seashell from the memory. Warm, faintly humming. She raised it to her ear. No ocean sound, just a voice, her own. The wind isn't empty, it's waiting. She held the shell close, and the amber lantern rose higher, leaving a faint trail of gold across the sky. A new constellation drawing itself in real time. Elaine watched as the waves below smoothed out. The broken waters calmed. The voices in the wind softened. The sky above rippled once like a sigh of relief. She placed the shell gently in her satchel beside the compass, the ring, and the paper boat. So many fragments of herself. So many truths returned. Ahead, one final lantern flickered. The smallest. The quietest. The last. Elaine let her hand rest on the side of the boat. "Almost home," she whispered. The stars heard her, and sang in reply. The final lantern hung low on the horizon, no brighter than a candle lost in mist. Elaine could barely see it, not because of distance, but because of stillness. It did not flicker, did not drift. It simply existed as if it had always been there, waiting for her to slow down enough to notice. The sea beneath it was motionless, a mirror so perfect even her thoughts felt too loud. She knew without asking, this lantern was not meant to be found. It was meant to be approached, gently, carefully, with reverence. She didn't steer the boat. She simply closed her eyes and let the stillness carry her. Time folded in on itself. She could feel it not passing, not pausing, but circling. Like breath in sleep, like waves that had forgotten how to crash. And then her boat stopped. She opened her eyes. The lantern was within reach. It hung from nothing, suspended in silence. Its flame was white, not shining, not warm, but pure. Elaine reached toward it, but her hand froze, because this lantern didn't need to be lit. It needed to be remembered. A whisper rose not from the sea, not from wind, but from within. "What did you leave behind when you chose to survive?" The voice was not accusatory. It was kind. Elaine sank slowly to her knees in the boat. Her satchel rested beside her. The ring, the compass, the shell, the paper boat, the matchbox now empty, the map glowing faintly. All of them parts of her journey. All of them pieces she had recovered. All except one, the piece she had never dared to look for. She closed her eyes again, reached deeper, not into the satchel, not into memory, but into the space behind her ribs, where she had buried it. And she found it, a single feather, black, smooth, and warm. She had carried it as a child, lost it the night Calum vanished, forgotten what it meant. Until now, it was the first piece of grief she had ever known, and she had hidden it not out of shame but out of survival. Because sometimes remembering hurts more than forgetting. She brought the feather to the lantern. didn't light it, didn't offer it. She simply held it beside the flame, and for a moment, they matched. The same shape, the same weight. The flame pulsed once, and then the lantern breathed. A soft exhale of light washed over the boat, over the sea, over the sky. Elaine gasped, because suddenly the silence was not empty. It was full, with everything she had once believed lost. The sound of Caleb's laughter echoing off stone walls. The feeling of her mother's hand brushing her hair back. The scent of rain on a childhood roof. The warmth of her first drawing, held up to the sun. The silence carried it all, not as noise, but as presence. The lantern rose, not rapidly, not triumphantly, but gently, like forgiveness. It floated higher and higher until it joined the other stars. She had kindled a sky now crowded not with constellations, but reunions. And when it found its place, the sky opened, and a path of pure white light descended from the heavens, stretching across the sea toward the island. Her island. Home. Elaine sat still for a long time. She was not crying. She was not smiling. She was simply whole. For the first time in her life, the boat turned unasked. Guided by the light, it sailed back the way it came. The sea parted with gratitude. The stars whispered their names. And the lighthouse on the island stood tall, glowing gold against the edge of night. Not because it had been waiting, but because it knew she would return. The boat kissed the shore with barely a sound. Elaine stepped onto the island, not as someone returning, but as someone arriving anew. The path up to the lighthouse had changed. The stones remembered her footsteps. The air smelled not of salt and solitude, but of lavender warmth, and something quietly sacred, the scent of stories, returned to their home. Above the tower pulsed with soft golden light. Not bright, not blinding, just complete. As she walked up the familiar slope, the wind did not whisper memories. It sang her name, not in longing, but in welcome. Inside the lighthouse, everything was as she had left it, and yet nothing felt the same. The kitchen kettle was warm. The desk held the old compass, now perfectly still, its needle pointed inward. The painting room glowed softly behind its hidden door colors, moving in gentle swirls. No longer a place of mystery, but of peace. The lantern room at the top no longer needed to be climbed in haste. Elaine ascended the spiral staircase with calm steps. Each one a heartbeat, each one a return. At the top, the great lens turned slowly, casting light not across the sea, but across the sky. She stepped to the window and looked out. The ocean shimmered with lantern trails, hundreds of them, leading from lighthouse to lighthouse, island to island. Some new, some ancient, some barely lit, but all alive. And above, a sky no longer silent. Her constellations had formed, not from stars, but from the people she had remembered. A boy made of wind and laughter. A mother's quiet courage. A child who once held too much. A girl who waited in fog and silence and never gave up the light. All shining, all still moving. Elaine sat before the beacon. It hummed softly, aware. She placed the items from her journey on the floor around her, one by one, gently like relics. The ring, the compass, the matchbox now spent, the paper boat, the amber shell, the feather, the glass map. And the final item, a small silver lantern, now cool, its flame resting within her chest. The wind moved through the window like a sigh. "Are you ready?" it asked, not with words, with presence. Elaine nodded. She lit the lighthouse one last time. The light that rose was not gold nor silver, nor any color the eye could hold. It was story, a sweeping current of every memory, every sorrow turned sacred, every silence transformed into song. It climbed the beacon and shot skyward, not to warn ships, but to awaken them. And as it passed through the lens, it did not just shine. It opened, a door in the sky, a seam in the stars, a path for others, for those who had forgotten their way, for those who were still drifting. And now, there would always be a light waiting. Because the lighthouse, her lighthouse, had remembered. Elaine sat back, hands folded in her lap, and exhaled. Not in sadness, in fullness. Outside, the sea rippled with quiet voices, thank yous. I remember soft laughter carried on waves of wind. She looked down at the final page of her old journal and picked up her pen. She wrote, "The story never ends. Only the chapter closes. Tonight I become the lighthouse. Tomorrow someone else will follow the lantern path." She closed the book. And for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to sleep. Not as a keeper of memories, not as the girl who had waited, but as the keeper of the last light. The sea watched over her, the stars whispered her name, and the island, once silent, once forgotten, breathed softly in the night. Remembered, the end.